Hello, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Saffron Henke. I'm the Assistant Director of the Grant Wood Art Colony. Myself, along with John Belden Scott, the Director of the Grant Wood Art Colony, as well as the Director of the school, and our Graduate Assistant, Calmia Strong. We aim to perpetuate the legacy of Grant Wood at the School of Art and Art History at the University of Iowa through the Grant Wood Art Colony and Fellowship Program. The Grant Wood Art Colony is unique among artist communities in that it has a deep relationship, institutionalized relationship with an academic state-sponsored institution of higher learning and the generous terms of its fellowship, including a visiting assistant professor rank, a one class per semester teaching load, studio space, salary, benefits, and housing at the Grant Wood Art Colony over on Burlington Street. The program continues to deepen its reputation across the state and nation, as well as embedding its presence in the Longfellow District in Iowa City. In fact, there are plans underway to finally get a sign, which seems like a little thing, but it makes it real 4 years later. As I said, now into its fourth year, the Grant Wood Fellowship Program continues its growth as one of the premier programs of its kind, receiving visibility not only locally, nationally, but worldwide. In addition to our painting and printmaking fellowships, this year we've introduced an interdisciplinary performing artist, and we have hopes that that fellowship will continue into the future. Last year, we received over 400 applications for the 3 fellowships. The fellows were chosen through a faculty committee, and I would like to publicly thank the faculty members who have served on the past committees. Could you please acknowledge yourselves? I acknowledge you. Thank you very much. I would also like to acknowledge the past Grant Wood Fellows, including Studio Fellow Laura Kapp, Teaching Fellows Tyler Starr, Maria Angeles Soto Diaz, Jeremy Lundquist, Hartmut Austin, who have all pointed to the Grant Wood Fellowship Program as being crucial in catalyzing the next phase of their careers. Finally, I'd like to invite you all to our 2014 Grant Wood Symposium entitled Revolt Against the City, Midwestern Culture in Hard Times, which will be April 25th and 26th, 2014. We look forward to Anthony Olafson of UT Austin presenting the keynote address entitled The Midwestern Mind of Frank Lloyd Wright, as well as 4 more speakers in the morning of the 26th. Kicking off the symposium will also be our Grant Wood Fellows exhibition and reception. For more information, please contact me or my assistant, Calmia Strong. We would love to keep you informed and add you to our mailing list. That weekend will also include our annual board meeting, and I'd like to finally acknowledge our board chair, Jim Hayes, and vice chair, Kim Callahan. Please acknowledge yourselves. Thank you. John Belden Scott is in seminar right now and will be joining us shortly. But now I'd like to introduce this year's fellows. We have Eric Sal in painting, Christina Pavas in printmaking, and Esther Baker Tarpaga in interdisciplinary dance. They will be introduced by Laurel Farron, Kehoe Ewan, and George de la Pena, respectively. Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm going to introduce the Grant Wood Painting Fellow for this year, Eric Saul. And I first saw Eric when he drove up in his 16-foot or 20-foot rider truck outside the Graduate Painting Studios on a very hot August day. And immediately I felt a bond because we've all unloaded and loaded studios many, many times over the year. He drove from Brooklyn, New York, where he was living, and he received a BFA from the Kansas City Art Institute and an MFA from VCU. Some of the recent activities of Eric have been studio fellowships for the Marie Sharp Walsh Space Program in Brooklyn, New York, also residencies in the Lower Manhattan Cultural Council in New York City and the Roswell Artist in Residence program in Roswell, New Mexico. He's also received a Joan Mitchell Foundation grant, a Virginia Museum of Art fellowship, and a Charlotte Street Fund Award. Some of his recent shows include Robin Lee Gallery in New York, Regina Rex Gallery in Queens, New York, ADA Gallery in Richmond, Virginia, the Brain Factory, Seoul, Korea, the Newman Museum of Fine Arts, Oakland Park, Kansas City, and the Bemis Center in Omaha, Nebraska. One thing I just wanted to say this week was that I took my graduate painting studio students to Eric's studio on Monday, and he's working on, Scott, is it a 20-foot by 8-foot painting that is a commission by the General Service Administration in Kansas City. And so he's working on that. Unfortunately, it's a vertical painting, and there's only 8-foot ceilings in the studio, so he has to work on it on his side. So we're all looking at it, like this, and he's been looking at it for 2 months like that. And but he's doing a great job on it. It was fantastic. The students love him already. It's only been 2 months since he's been here. And I just wanted to remind you that the health insurance is very good. So chiropractic is covered, tilt away. So please join me in welcoming Eric Saul.
Thanks Laurel and the School of Art, Saffron and Kalmia, and Jim and the Art Colony for bringing me here. I'm really excited to be here. I've been having a great time already. So this is me when Laurel and her students came in on Monday, and I laid down to show them how sometimes I start my day in the studio when I'm working on this giant 3-panel canvas that's 19.5 feet long. It'll be tall, but it's 19.5 feet by 8 feet. So it takes up my entire wall of the studio, and I either have to take photographs of it or lay down to look at it in the right orientation. So it's been a fun challenge, and this is really the epitome of laying down on the job, and I need to do this a lot to see what's going on. But this is what I'm working on now. I want to take you back to 1999. We're going to go through a lot of images. I graduated from the Art Institute in 1999 in the spring, and I got a studio right away in a warehouse in Kansas City. And I came from a school where there was a lot of abstraction going on at the time, so I was really educated in my painting. I was influenced by the abstraction of my peers and my professors, Lester Goldman, Warren Rosser, Jim Brinsfield at the Art Institute. And this was the first painting I felt like was a milestone for me outside of school. I made this in the winter of '99 after working in the fall. Sorry if you can't hear me. And this painting is 6.5 feet tall by 8 feet wide. And the revelation for me in this work and the work I was making at the time was to introduce the idea of a horizon line into the paintings, because I wanted the abstract marks that I was working with at school and being influenced by my peers, I wanted to connect it with the work I was looking at and influenced by painters like Picasso and Gustin, and I wanted a sense of a place or a presence. So for me, it was this introduction of a horizon line that would allow the works to feel like landscapes or still lifes or kind of existing within interiors. And another device that I employed early on was this shelf, or like a plinth that these otherwise kind of abstract stripes or shapes could sit on, so that they felt like they were real objects existing in these spaces. And they're all pretty big paintings. I always have liked to work big, so they tend to be 5 to 7 feet, 6 to 8 feet, 6 to 9 feet. And they were fairly, I had a process that I would do where I would do these stains on the canvas first. Sometimes they would be acrylic, and I would do an acrylic stain that I would kind of incorporate with the gesso process, or other times I would just use oil paint like watercolor, and it would be dispersed really thin and washy. And I liked this happen that was kind of like alchemy on the surface of the canvas, and then I would build these objects up on top. And I was just interested in this idea of how could I make a figure? How can I make an object? How can I give substance to these forms? These last few paintings, these are very big, 8 by 10 feet wide. When I won the Charlotte Street Fund Award in Kansas City, it was an unrestricted cash award. And one of the first things I did was I bought a ton of paint and I built the biggest stretchers I could because I thought, well, that's what you do with a bunch of free money. And I like to think of these as being having a mood that was evocative of seasons or temperatures. 2002, I moved to Roswell, New Mexico to do the year-long residency down there. And the first thing I did there was make these gigantic stretchers also. And I was very influenced by the landscape and the light. And so I made a couple of my New Mexico desert paintings. This one's called Western Southwestern. It's 8 by 10 feet. And they happened, they were slow to make, but I didn't work on them for a long time. I spent a lot of time looking at them, but they have very thin washes underneath. You can see the tooth of the canvas. This one started as a horizontal painting, and at some point the right side of the canvas kind of fell apart, and I turned it on its side. And that's something I do all the time still, is I rotate my paintings a lot to try to find the form when I'm kind of struggling with the image, or what seems to be the image. So this one is a 10-foot tall painting, and it really was, it felt to me like this hulking form that was carving through a body of water or something. And at the same time, I would make a few paintings that were intensely built up and had a real thick surface, and they were kind of the opposite of the very thin, washy paintings. So I would work on these for 8 or 9 months at a time and work on it, a couple times a week, and the surface was very rich and textural. And at this point, my wife and I were really getting into textiles and collecting antique rugs and neat textiles like that. So this one always had a feel of like a woven rug to me. And at the end, I do this a lot. I kind of obliterate an image or something that I worked real hard at. So you can see all these tiny little marks that make up kind of like a pixelation of marks, and then at the very end I would go and scrape them all over with like a black paint or something. And I tend to work in phases too, where if I did a few kind of gray or dark paintings, I might follow that up with a few light-filled, color-filled paintings. So we left New Mexico and came back to Kansas City, and the first few paintings I made there were much more light feeling to me. This idea of playing with the horizon line or things that could indicate interiors or exteriors started extending around the canvas to ideas of framing and containing an image, how an image could be built up, and maybe it's playing with its borders and breaking up the space somehow. Is it contained or is it being liberated? This painting is called Magnetic Mess. This is about 2004. I never have a source, a specific source material for these paintings. They just start. I kind of put paint down. I need something to respond to with on the surface of the painting, so I usually put paint down and it starts from there. But as I work into them, they take a direction of their own. And this painting, at this time in 2004, it was the first time I got a digital camera, and it's also the first time I got a laptop computer, and it really affected the way I made my paintings, and that I started taking pictures of the paintings pretty much every day. And then I would put those pictures on my computer, and I would look at them in Photoshop, and it was a new way to kind of strategize compositions or changing colors. And in this particular instance, the painting had this pink and black kind of washy background, and I was trying to figure out a way to change that. And I was doing things like fill with the paint bucket on Photoshop. And so the top half I filled solid, but on the bottom the paint was getting stuck in the lines of the shadows it saw in the pink and black. So it made this weird camouflage fractal composition. And I would print that out, and then I kind of paint it one-to-one. It was like a challenge for myself to do this kind of photo real translation between the Photoshop process and then my hand. And this one I was also interested in the idea that all my images were being contained in the center of the canvas, so I wanted to think about what if things kind of flew out from the center to the edges, so those circles were kind of being pushed out from the central image. That is like, well, maybe there's nothing in the middle. Maybe everything's pushed to the edges. And maybe what's in the center really is this atmosphere and this beauty. And this is called light and magic. And to me, it kind of spoke of something that happened in the process, and that alchemy of like paint kind of mixing and doing what it wants to on the surface at some point, and then me trying to turn that into something else. What would I turn it into? Maybe it's just more like a sunset or something. Of course, I followed that with this very intense painting I worked on for about a year, and I changed it. Every month it looked like a completely different painting. This is 8 feet tall by 6.5 feet wide again. And it changed so many times that finally I covered the entire surface of the painting in black paint. It was the only way I could start fresh, and it has a real physical presence, thick. It took maybe 10 large tubes of paint to just cover that surface up. And for some reason, it allowed me to let loose on the painting again. And everything, I think of everything underneath that as integral to the painting at the end, but you never really see that. It's kind of embedded in, it's the history of the painting. Some paintings you see it, others you don't. But this group of paintings started taking on this real animalistic quality where this weird image within the painting was kind of making itself and consuming itself as I would make it. This one's called We Become Silhouettes. And I started doing this kind of putting shadows or silhouette forms around some of the gestures that were happening real spontaneously. I wanted to slow down that speed that happens. This one's a slippery silhouette, so that silhouette is kind of slipping away. I like this idea that the image is being constructed and kind of deconstructing at the same time, and it's hard to tell at what state it's in. But this one's slipping. This image is dripping. I also like this idea of verbs to kind of describe what the paintings do or emotions that they can evoke. Right around this time, somehow I discovered this mark on accident where I was trying to cover something up, and I had a bunch of colors that I squeezed out of the tube side by side, and I pulled them and they made these stripes. This was in 2005, I think. It was kind of a happy accident, and it was something that then I wanted to gain more control of and I used more often. So I liked the graphic quality of these stripes, how they could become awnings or refer to things like sports. They reminded me of like soccer jerseys or something. And they're being made in the moment, very much wet on wet paint. So part of it is collapses into kind of this somewhat chaotic but still ordered area. It's before it turns into mud. There's this fine line where it's kind of this dancing act of will it fall apart, will it stay pure color. This is called striated stack. So I did several of these employing this method where I would pull these stripes. And they were very thick, and they cast a shadow, especially if you light them a certain way, they would cast shadows, and you could kind of look at them from the side and see underneath the painting. So then I tried to paint stripes a different way. If I was pulling them, then I wanted to paint them with my hand in a different way. And in this painting, it really happened kind of at the same time as this other one, but it was kind of a cleansing again, where I was interested in this arch form, which has reoccurred in several paintings since then. But partially, I think it's because I've driven by the St. Louis Arch a lot of times. I'm drawn to that form. I'm intrigued by it, so it ended up in my painting somehow. And then I painted the stripes around it. Another one of these really full pictures. It's called Total Devastation. Everything hits at once. I started thinking, gosh, I'm putting so much into the paintings. Like every kind of trick I do, I put into every painting, and it seems ridiculous. It reminded me of like a one-man marching band, and it was a cacophonous noise. And I think that's good, and I think it's bad. It's kind of changed my mind about it, but it really felt like, man, I put a lot of things into each painting. I did a couple of these kind of mountain forms. And they're kind of piles in the way that all the paintings are piles. And my wife will tell you I'm a piler. I pile things up around the house. It's kind of a way I organize. When I'm cleaning or I think I'm organizing, I really just pile things up. And I do the same thing in my painting. It's kind of like push it over here and pile it and like make it nice and neat. With these, I was also thinking a lot about the Augustan paintings with piles of legs and forms like that. This one's called Fair and Balanced, which was, for me, thinking about, when is a painting balanced? When is the image balanced? Is it falling apart? I also liked that phrase when it was just kind of a catchphrase in politics around the time on Fox News. This painting is called Gutted. This one's called Never Enough. And again, it's just continuing this idea, like how much can I put into these things before they fall apart? In the middle, there's that black square, and you can kind of see all the texture underneath it. There's a whole series of those pulled stripes that then I painted over with black to just obliterate, and then I pile on all the stuff on the bottom. I keep thinking, how much is too much? How much is enough? This is kind of the end result of that, this large painting where every single thing I did inside the painting I covered up at the end with all of this really thick paint. And it's like the surface of the scarred earth or something. It's really intense in person, and it also kind of flickers with light, so it looks like when you look at cities from the sky, from a plane or something. This is the return of that arch form, but it was upside down, so it kind of plays with language and letters and icons or graphic images. This one's kind of the opposite of that. It's like a portal. I like how that arch can kind of be symbolic of a portal to somewhere else, which I think we talk about paintings a lot that way anyway. It's kind of a purging after all of that craziness of paint again. This is a pretty small painting. It's maybe 2 by 3 feet. And sometimes I do these little intimate paintings. They're like, I think of them as like Italian Renaissance portraits. I like how black works in paintings, how it can really be moody and it can cancel things out, or it can punch colors up a little bit. I started using black a lot more on this series of paintings. I started blacking everything out. I wanted the black to be kind of like something on the surface of your eye between you and the painting. This is my studio in 2008 or 9 maybe. And oftentimes when I work on big paintings, I have this other thing going on with it, photos, small paintings on paper. So I was organizing all of these images. I had a studio visit with my gallery in Kansas City, and they said, "This is cool, you should do this in the gallery in your show this spring." So I made a version of this. And for me, it's like showing kind of my thought process and how I organize images that I'm interested in, how they play into the bigger paintings I work on. It's called Blown Out. It's called Washed Out. In Bloom. Peace Bone. There's me and my son Wyatt. This is 2010. Gosh, he's like a month or two old. This was my studio in Brooklyn, looking out at the Manhattan Bridge and the East River there, which was a great place to work. And this is that studio at the time. And this funny painting, this is Hairpiece, and then this other painting, I was really moved by this Picasso show at the Gagosian Gallery that was about the Mosqueteros, all the Spanish bullfighters, and I wanted to make one of those paintings. But it was also like the state I was feeling with lack of sleep. It was like crazy eyes. Like, I kind of came into play with this painting, and I got a little obsessed with pattern making for a while there. What could become pattern? What repeating shapes, do they become pattern or are they not pattern? When do they fall apart? I had a couple of these canvases where I had scraps laying around the studio, and Rachel sewed them up for me into these bigger panels, and then I stretched them. And so like this one, I just would paint every different piece of canvas a different color, and that dictated the composition. Really, it was kind of a nice way for me to not think about the structure in a certain way. This is called Love, Love, Love. This is my studio that I just left in Brooklyn. This is when I moved in a couple of years ago. There's Wyatt at about 2. That's kind of a good scale picture to see a small painting, a big painting. That big painting is the same size as a lot of them. It's 8 feet by 6.5 feet. I like how his coat kind of matches the painting, like little things that seep in. So I did this series of, they're kind of tablets. They're all these rectangles that exist. And I was talking to Laurel students about, it's around the time we got an iPad. I was thinking about the idea of tablets, or like how we look at images on square screens. And I'd always been interested in like tombstones or things where information was kind of cloudy, old tombstones or shapes, old tablets where you can't read them anymore. This level of information that's kind of obscure. And I started working on this. Those are the big paintings I'd worked on, and then this piece on the right, which was a scale study for the piece I'm working on now. So this was like a year and a half ago, and it's 10 chipboard pieces that I just kind of screwed to the wall so they could be the same size. It's like 8 feet by 20 feet maybe. And that was like just a scale practice for working on this piece and also having to deal with it sideways. And then a couple of the big paintings that I worked on at that time. Sometimes things like that oval, this is something I come up with on Photoshop. Like I paint the whole painting in the studio, and then one night I was screwing around on Photoshop and put a circle on it, and then I went back and I painted on it at the very end. This is called Westward. This is Birdie Brain. A couple small paintings from this time. These were from this last spring. This is kind of a funny painting. A couple of the paintings have had a little bit more illicit imagery in them, like these leaf shapes that are actually in the painting I'm working on now. And then these paintings that had cutouts, where I was, instead of using Photoshop, I would just take paper and cut it out and like stick it to the canvas to come up with different compositions. And then after I did that and like it, then I go back and paint it on. So, or this is a bigger painting, and I just kind of stick white paper on it and then go back and paint it if I like it. Blue marks, like kind of playing on blue tape. This is a real recent one. I folded up paper like snowflakes and cut these patterns in them, and then I just paint that one-to-one on the canvas. This is another brand new one from this summer, right before we moved here. A couple new ones in my studio here. And then, so this is the piece I'm working on now. This is a mock-up of my proposal that showed the scale and the location. This is in the lobby of the Federal Building in Kansas City. It's like 24 feet tall in there, so my painting will be about 20 feet tall, and it's a triptych. So in my studio, when I got the panels there, they really go from like wall to wall and floor to ceiling. And that's why I lay down and look at it. And this is the beginning of that painting. After a few sessions, this will go. And then that's like another mock-up of what it could look like. And that's what I'm working on now.
Okay, I don't think I can stand behind the computer like he does. You will not able to see me. I would like to introduce Christina Habas, our Glenwood fellows in the printmaking area. Christina studied fine arts and religious study at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, printmaking at the Estonian Academy of Art, and received a BFA and art history concentration from Rhode Island School of Design. And in 2009, she earned her MFA from the School of Art Institute of Chicago and then moved to Tallinn, okay, and in Estonia as a Fulbright Fellow and visiting artist at the Estonian Academy of Arts. Christina works examine system of logics that we as groups and individuals use to enforce perception of structures, and through a multidisciplinary approach to create images, environment, and situation that teeter between reality and illusion. I think I can be her exhibit A, you know. Christina had exhibited her work in Chicago, Boston, Minneapolis, Milwaukee, Rosendale, and many other places. At Berlin, I was pretty worried about how to pronounce all those cities. And she just said, well, just say, you know, Romania, Estonia, New York. So I'm just throwing those out. And of course, also include Wisconsin, Minneapolis, and Illinois. And Christina was an instructor and graduate coordinator in the Department of Print Media at the School of Art Institute of Chicago. And of course, certainly now she is currently our assistant professor and Glenwood Fellow in the printmaking area. Now, personally, I really enjoyed the knowledge, the energy, the enthusiasm that she brings to the studio. And you can always see she running around in the studio, getting things done, working with the students. And that is really a major, major thing that, you know, I would appreciate you, you know, bring to the studio. Please join me to welcome Christina.
Well, first of all, thank you. I want to say thank you to the School of Art History and the Grant Wood Art Colony. I've had a really wonderful time so far, and also thank you to all the students, faculty, and staff for being so welcoming. So thank you. All right, so I'm going to go through a really quick chronology of my work. I have a lot of slides, so some of them I'll just breeze over really quickly. So I'm also going to take you back in time. This is from 2005. I just moved to Minneapolis. I was printing at the High Point Center for Printmaking and started this whole new series of work that I made right before beginning graduate school. And so in this series, I was really focused on the body and the kind of interactions or these imagined spaces of interactions of causality within the body. And so what I was doing was I was screen printing images and then also painting and drawing on top of the paper. And all of these are quite large. They're anywhere from 22 by 30 to 26 by 40. And so you can see in these two images that the actual matrix or the stencil for the screen is the same, this kind of blue or black form. And then I drew on top of that and kind of pulled out the information that I wanted. And some of them were very specific. This one was called Evolution in 210. So it was specifically about the Russian spy that had been poisoned with polonium-210. And so it was a kind of imagined case of events that would happen within that body. And so then I started graduate school at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago and knew that I wanted to take my work into a sculptural realm and take it off of the page and almost make these drawings into spatial conversations. And so see, these are some of the first pieces that I made during that time. And so using the wall as the page and kind of breaking off of that. But I also wanted to break the conversation outside of just the body and bring it into a conversation that was a little bit broader. But this is my first foray into sculptural work. The only kind of sculptural things that I had made before that were my hobby of making hand puppets, and then also costume making. These are some of my early costumes, all kinds of different things. One of them, that bull, is my graduation cap from RISD. And then these are my last two Halloween costumes. On the left, on my left, I'm a three-toed sloth, and then the other one is a Yeti. When you hit the eyeballs, they blink red. So this is all I knew about building. So I had to take these kind of processes and start working with materials in a different way, coming from a two-dimensional background. And so this is an installation that I made called Modus Operandi, Modal Retention, in 2008. So I transformed my entire studio space into an installation space. So really thinking of the whole studio as a drawing and trying to bend the space of it. And so again, like I said, I'm coming from a two-dimensional background. So this was a kind of interesting challenge for me, this kind of, or conversation, this idea of the two-dimensional versus the three-dimensional. And so elements of this, like the back wall that has paintings in the image on the left, that has painted elements on the wall, but also sculptural welded steel that comes off and forms a three-dimensional element. And so during this time, I was also thinking a lot about the kind of systems of logic that we use in our daily lives. So whether that's as a group, the ones that we kind of agree on, like language or architecture, or the kind of systems of logic that we make for ourselves to live by, that sometimes are arbitrary, but have some foundation in your own kind of personal history. These are a few other installations that I made during graduate school. And some of these this is a screen printed plastic that's also painted and then welded, a welded element, and so kind of examining these conversations between objects and also two-dimensional space. At the same time, I was thinking a lot about architecture, and I became especially interested in brutalist architecture that was all around me in Chicago. This is a hospital that I would pass on a regular basis. This is Kennedy King College, which before it opened, it won all kinds of awards for its welcoming presence in the community and the way that it was going to bring the community into the space. But in fact, it did not do that at all. It was a complete failure and closed within 30 years of opening. And so this is what it looks like now, and they had to just rebuild a whole new building because it didn't function well. People get lost in certain hallways. And so I was really interested in that kind of idea of grandeur and then also failure. This is Boston City Hall. I grew up in Massachusetts, so this was another brutalist building, often voted the ugliest building in America. And then this is a building from Tbilisi, Georgia, that is part of a kind of brutalist Soviet architecture history. And so thinking about these kind of architecture, buildings, and then space, I was also considering how we move around those spaces. And so this is a Jasper Johns piece that is based on Duchamp's The Bride Stripped Bare. And it was a piece that he made for the Merce Cunningham Dance Company. And so I was thinking about how we move around these spaces. And so for my thesis exhibition, I built this. This was what I ended up with. And so I had to fabricate this wall. And so when you walk up to it, it seems like just a small kind of sculptural element right in front, this kind of piece of foam. But if you walk to the side of it, you would notice that there was a whole kind of other conversation going on behind it. And so the way that I thought of it was that the sculpture in the front was almost like a footnote, and that if you read the footnote or engaged with it, then all the information was on the back. I was also reading a lot of David Foster Wallace at the time, so appreciating these very long footnotes. And this is the other side of it. But what became really interesting was that some people would easily dismiss the piece, and at the School of the Art Institute of Chicago, for the thesis exhibition, there's well over 100 people in the show with you. And so it becomes people vying for attention. So I really liked the idea of having this piece that was really quiet. And only if you engaged with it, you might recognize that there's something there. Or sometimes people would go behind the piece and see something, and then other people would notice that someone was looking at something, and then kind of go and discover the piece for themselves. Shortly after that, I was invited to have a show at Burlesque of North America, which is a screen printing shop in Minneapolis. And I knew I wanted to make an installation, but didn't know, I hadn't been to the space, so I just packed my car up with a lot of things and got there. And so this is an installation that I made, but unfortunately fortunately, it was also where the restroom was. So during the exhibition, people would kind of open the door and come in and come out and surprise other people, but I really liked, again, that interaction or the idea of like the set or the theater of that. This is the other side of the space. I had another installation that was kind of in tandem with that. This one was called Roaming Fact, and so this one was Stable Trail. But then I also made a series of screen prints called Syntax Cross Section. And so with this, I was really examining the idea of language. And so I used 56 different hand-drawn, hand-cut stencils that I combined together in different ways to kind of form different conversations in each piece, but working within a set of these kind of parameters. And here's a few close-ups of these. They're all unique screen prints on paper. For some of my screen students who I think I saw, you'll appreciate the bleed edge that we discuss often. And then that series, I'm going to jump ahead just for a moment to 2011, and I did a residency at Women's Studio Workshop in Rosendale, New York, and it was a 6-week residency, so I made a lot of different things. By the end of it, I had 20 screens going at once. And so it was a pretty intense process. But these are sampling. There's actually 30 of these in total, and it was a series called the Excess series. And so again, I was working with this idea of language, but also with the idea of excess and this kind of barrage of information that we face daily, especially with things like the internet. But this time I'm also using over 200 hand-cut and hand-drawn stencils. Some of them are reused from before, and then some of them are made specifically for this. And here's a few close-ups. And so at points they had 30 layers, and so the paper started to break down because it just couldn't handle any more. And then just to go back in time now, it's 2009 summer, and I moved to Estonia. This is my second time moving to Estonia. I lived there for a year during my undergraduate degree at the Estonian Academy of Arts and studied printmaking. And the reason why is because I was born and raised in the U.S., but my parents both are immigrants from Estonia, and so we grew up speaking Estonian only in the household, never outside. Or never speaking English inside the house, rather. And then also going to Estonian school every Saturday, going to Estonian camp in New Jersey. And this kind of dual identity has played a big influence on my work, this kind of distinction of space. So like I said, the kind of private and public space, using languages in a certain way, having those two spaces distinct. And then also, I put my passports up because I think that they're kind of humorous, because my American passport is, smiling in it, and my Estonian passport, I'm not smiling, which is a kind of very typical part of the Estonian reserved nature. Whenever I come back after spending a year there, I have to retrain myself to smile in public, because there it would be considered kind of suspicious if you smiled in public, unnecessarily. This is the downtown, or the old town of Tallinn. It is the most intact medieval city in all of Europe, really quite beautiful. And of course, Estonia was under Soviet rule until 1991. And so there's a lot of destruction, but a lot of regrowth now as well. Now they're part of the EU. So I moved to Estonia, left everything, all of my belongings behind, moved to a place that I've lived before, but I know it's very cold and dark. And so my work started to really pare itself down. And so this is a couple of drawings that I call Data Collection 1 and 2. And so instead of having all those kind of things around me all the time, I instead was drawing those items. I was also there to study animation. I was there on a Fulbright called Bridging Two Worlds, Animating Lived Space. And so my proposal and my project included learning animation with Bri Pern and Ulo Bitkov, two really world-renowned animators at the Estonian Academy of Arts, to incorporate time, movement, and narrative into my work. And so here's a few of the pieces that I made while I was there. And these are all traditional hand-drawn animation. But while I was also working on the animations, I was now starting to think of my drawings in ways of these kind of narratives or sequential kind of pieces, but also not having a kind of tangible narrative in a way, but rather having it, having the pieces kind of rely on each other to build the meaning. This piece is really hard to see, but the index cards are quite small, maybe like 2 by 3 inches each, and it's a growing, constantly growing drawing installation. It's called a flexible grid, and it's all just these small grids dancing around. And I was happy to hear Eric talk about piles, because I also have a fascination with piles. This piece is called I Measure Everything in Terms of Buckets and Piles. And I was exactly drawn to piles for the same reason, because it's about this organizational system that we have, or that we think makes a difference, but really you take this information and you fundamentally don't change anything. You just change where you place it. And that was a really interesting idea to me. And here's a few other kind of drawing installations that I made while I was there. And then I did a residency in Iceland on my way back to the US. And it was a short 8-day residency. On the first day that I got there, they said, "Oh, do you want to be part of an exhibition in 4 days?" And I said, "Yes, of course." But I also wanted to make all new work. So I would walk around all day. And of course, this is white nights. It's summer in Reykjavik. So I would walk around all day, kind of get influenced by my surroundings, and then draw all night. And so this was the drawing series that I made while I was there. And then returning back to the States, I was, again, had access to things, and so wanted to bring what I had kind of learned from translating my sculptural work back into drawings, and then translating that back into kind of sculptural or installation work. And so this is a installation that I made called Speculative Proof. And so I wanted to use the drawings as a kind of diagram, but also build the space into a kind of diagram. The space itself was all wood paneled, and so I had to put white contact paper over everything to get it to the state that I wanted it to be in, so I couldn't paint it. Here's a few close-ups of the drawings. This is when you enter the space here on the left, and then if you were to look right. And the paper that's hanging on the walls is all screen printed. And that set me off on a whole kind of diagrammatical drawing rampage. And so I'm not going to kind of delve into all of these because I won't have enough time, but I kind of wanted to show them quickly. This one's called the Getaway Seat. It's called To the Victor Go the Spoils. Save It for Later. When It Was Endless. This is a photolitho that was part of the same series of drawings. It's called Filter Barrier Match. This one's very specifically about this idea of perception and having two objects that appear similar in this kind of ocular spot, but having them actually be quite different, or having the view of them or their reflection or projection end up being very different. This one's called From Here to There, and it's a diptych drawing, and it's framed in two separate panels, but together it equals think 30 inches or 36 from the top to the bottom. These were some smaller drawings that I was making spray paint stencils with onto paper, and then kind of almost like I had started the screen print series that I first showed you, and then kind of reinterpreting those stencils in different ways. This is a installation shot from the Midway Art Fair in Chicago in 2011. This is a series of screen printed panels called Stay that have taken form in a few different ways since this showing. Then I took a trip to Azerbaijan in the winter of 2012 for 2 weeks, and was really influenced by this stay there. And I got back and I had a show just shortly after, only about a month after, so I had a lot of work to do in a short period of time. And so I was thinking about this trip that I had taken, and this was a piece that I made after coming back, and it's called Good Fences Make Good. And being that I'm a New Englander, I was playing off of this idea of Robert Frost's poem, Good Fences Make Good Neighbors, and this idea of boundaries. And the way that the piece kind of developed was that while we were driving through the countryside of Azerbaijan, it was often that we would see a road barrier or highway barrier that had been kind of falling apart, and so a new one was being built in front of it. And so I like that idea of the facade being changed in some way, but in this not changing the thing that's behind it, right? But at some point, we were driving through the mountains, I saw this wall that kind of seemed to have no purpose, but it was perfectly built in the middle of nowhere. And so I really liked that idea of this boundary being distinct and being there, but perhaps not serving any really good reason. This one's called A Million Piles and Three Dead Dogs. It's also about the drive through the countryside. Because for some reason, along the highways, every so often, you would see miles of stretch of these piles that had been swept into perfect rocks, and I was really impressed by that. But then there were also dog carcasses. So this one's called Marked for Depletion. And then this is an installation viewed from the same exhibition. The piece in the foreground is called Me and Everyone I Know is on a Bridge to Nowhere. And it was based on the fact that when we went to Azerbaijan, my mother and my sister and I, which is everyone in my immediate family, got into a car and drove up a mountainside that was all icy and snowy, and there were rocks falling and all these danger signs. And at the top, there's just like this really small town with no gas station, nothing really there, but this really beautiful town. But during Soviet times in Azerbaijan, the Russians had built this bridge to nowhere there, and so that's all that exists at the top of this mountain in this little town, along with a few shops and things like that. But so I liked that idea. I also liked that we were willing to kind of risk our lives to go on this adventure. This piece came shortly after the Good Fences Make Good, and this is a whole series of work that I made based on insomnia and what happens when we go off of the construct of time. And specifically, so while I was in Estonia, I kind of quit sleeping for a while because of the really dark nights. When it's that dark all the time, you lose track of when you should be sleeping and just kind of forget to. And so that idea of your perception starting to change and get confused was what was driving these pieces. Most of them are named for numbers. This one's called 24H. And that's not the number, that's not the amount of time it takes to make them, but rather the idea of time. So it'd be 24 hours, like a 24-hour period. So it's also about it getting light and dark out. This one's called As the Day is Long. And they're all oil, marker, and graphite on wooden panel. This one's -1H. This one's 3H. This one's again and again. Oops. This one's once. This is just a shot from my studio in Chicago, just to kind of see what it looks like at any given time. Kind of a mess. Here's another studio shot. There's a piece that was not finished, and then this is when it was finished. I'm running low on time, but I'm almost done. This is a piece that I made during my first week here in Iowa. It's called Reasonable Assumption, and it is a kind of sculptural piece. And this is what my studio looks like at the moment. I'm working on a series of panels that are created with the use of screen printing, a lot of stencil making and spray paint, and then some painting as well. And they're for a commission, and I hope to be finished soon. The top two are done, but the bottom two aren't quite yet done. And there's a fifth one that I just started reworking. Here's the other side of my studio, and that big orange panel is I'm working currently on a installation that opens in Chicago on November 15th. So very soon. It's, the whole idea, it's called A Box for Each of Us, and the whole idea behind it is that it's about surveillance in our culture, and so I'm basing the design of it on Jeremy Bentham's Panopticon design, which was a prison design from the late 1800s. It was never actually built, but this is one of the closest things to it, where the guard sat in this kind of tower in the middle, and he could see all of the prisoners from that vantage point, but the prisoners didn't actually know if there was someone there in the tower, present or not present, and so it was kind of that constant feeling of being watched. Then I'm just going to say a few words about a collaborative practice that I did last summer while I was in a residency at Acre in Steuben, Wisconsin. So my collaborator, Matt Nichols, and I built this Estonian-style village swing. And this is a really typical structure found all throughout Estonia. It's part of the history and part of our culture. That these were originally built during pagan times to ensure a good harvest. So at certain points of the year, say in early April, people would swing to ensure that that year would be a good harvest. And then it was also a kind of platform for people to meet each other. The single men of the village would usually go out and build these into the village square, or also just in the forest somewhere. And because the climate is so cold there in the winter, in the summer it was a chance for everyone to kind of get together and get outside and have this kind of space to interact. And so Matt and I built this swing at Acre, not actually on the Acre grounds, but nearby, just about a 20-minute drive, just because shockingly in the US it's really hard to let someone or give you the opportunity to build this because of litigious purposes. So it took a good year from thinking about this project to actually being able to realize it for that reason. But now it's up and working. And again, we built it with that idea for communication. So it was a public sculpture, but also a kind of space for people to have conversations on. All right, so that's it. If you have any questions, we're on it.
Wow, it is so thrilling to look at all this amazing work. You guys are just stunning. Makes me think of the period in the 1900s when Diaghilev was inviting all kinds of people like Picasso and Massine to collaborate, Nijinsky and Bakst, and they made some very exciting, rich work. And everyone was well served by that collaboration, speaking of collaboration. But it's particularly exciting when we are able to find an artist who uses all of those elements in her work, and that's Esther Baker Tarpaga. She finds all these things and puts them in her pieces, and also does collaboration, and that's pretty thrilling for us. Esther comes to us by way of the World Arts and Cultures Department at UCLA, where she received her MA and her MFA in choreography. She also is the co-director of the Baker and Tarpaga Dance Project, transnational dance theater performances. They have performed in places such as Jacob's Pillow Inside Out Festival in Massachusetts, Kelly Strayhorn Theater in Pittsburgh, Action Dance Festival in Morocco, Dava Theater Citoyen hors Cité, mon Dieu, in Morocco, and Red Cat Now Festival in Los Angeles, Ford Amphitheater in Los Angeles, Highway Performance Space in Santa Monica, Dialogue de Corps Contemporary Dance Festival in Burkina Faso, where she does quite a bit of work, and she's preparing a work that we hope to take some of our dancers to perform this coming summer. She and her husband are making very exciting work, and we are so thrilled to have her with us. A little side note, the students have just been absolutely raving about her because she asks the most compelling questions rather than judging. And this invites great creativity, and for that we are very grateful that she is with us. Thank you.
I'm going to talk a little bit and show some video. Thank you, Kalmia. And then there's a live performance, so please stay because there's some audience participation. So thank you to the Grant Wood Fellowship, Saffron Henke, Kalmia Strong, at Georgia La Pena, the University of Iowa Department of Dance. I'm a choreographer, performance artist, dancer, and interdisciplinary artist. As co-artistic director of Baker and Tarpaga Dance Project, a transnational dance project based in the USA and Burkina Faso, West Africa. I have a 15-year history of working with African and American-based artists. In addition, my recent work as a performance artist with Guillermo Gomez Peña, La Pocho Nostra Troupe, has opened up an artistic practice where my work is grounded in the rich intersections between text, visual art, sound, and body. During my Grant Wood residency, I'm working on several projects. My current research is on race, sexuality, and motherhood as performance impetus for the body. Specifically, I've been obsessed with inscribing, writing, costuming, and improvising my dancing body, as well as the bodies of others. During this first month, I have been reflecting on my performance projects addressing race. I have taken time to read scholarship on whiteness and structural racism. As I process this scholarship, I paint to create abstract visual scapes of words and color on paper. This is a between step because I previously would work with a dancing body right away. But painting and writing allow an external step before the choreographed body. As a performing artist where the body is central, personal narrative is at the heart of much of my work. I am working in a new way to process ideas before returning to the performed body, which holds loaded representations and histories of skin and gender. Another project I am working on is in the very initial research stages, and I'd like to make a performance art and photography project based on several of Grant Wood's paintings, in particular his portrait work. In this work, I'd like to create performative tableaux vivants, as well as material photographs of contemporary Iowans. Using the iconic portrait tradition, I'm interested in queering and coloring the image. I also have an ongoing collaboration with my daughter, Windiga Tarpaga, and her friend is here, Genesee. She's in the back there. And Windiga is 5 years old and a fierce dance improviser and painter. She shows me new ways of viewing the world. In our collaboration, she reinterprets my research and flips the script. Being a white mother to a black daughter has raised many questions for me around race and gender. I have an ongoing project titled Whiteness Revisited that interrogates white supremacy, social constructs, and institutionalized racism. I have choreographed and performed numerous iterations both in short site-based solos for myself and other performers, as well as choreographed an evening-length work for the stage with 5 performers and musician collaborators, as well as other video work I've made. As I inscribe and write on my body or ask others to do so, I'm interested in what is visible, what is invisible. And in the past 2 years, I've deepened my work in performance art, working with a network of artists. These collaborations bring in heavy use of props, text, performance interactions with audiences, site activism, and border politics, amongst many other things. It is a home for my questions around what is representation, what is fantasy, what is autobiography, and how do my performance glitches sit next to other personas simultaneously. This is from the Pocha Nostra show in San Francisco at the Performance Art Institute there with Guillermo Gomez Peña. In addition to shorter solo works, I've also created an evening-length choreography with 5 professional performers and musicians. All of the performers have deep African diasporic dance histories in their training and culture. The following is a 2-minute clip from a recent choreography project titled Beautiful Struggle. This evening-length work was recently presented by the City of Columbus for Black History Month at the MLK Complex and oversees the Ichoch Festival in Madagascar with support from a New York Live Arts Suitcase Fund. And in February, we'll be performing at the Kelly Strayhorn Theater. So as a frequent border crosser between the USA and Africa, North Africa, West Africa, South Africa, East Africa, Senegal, Burkina, etc., I have the privilege of meeting many people who are working as artists and advocates to shift perceptions of Africa. From these experiences, my work reflects the great potential for movement and expansion when working within limitations from internal or external conditions. I revisit constantly the theme of struggle or resistance as social justice issues. My performance work is and process is ethno-choreographic because I draw from the embodied histories of each performer, which these dancers experience, and you'll see a little. I definitely work very collaboratively, giving tasks and learning about their personal histories and their physical histories as well. So they're very much a collaborative part of my process. I engage the individual voices within the community in both process and product. And my interest in the individual and the community stem from my personal history and my cross-cultural experiences in community-based movement cultures. As I mentioned previously, transnational collaborations are at the heart of a lot of my creative work. As a teacher, I draw from my direct experience and am currently teaching a graduate seminar in interdisciplinary collaboration and performance here at University of Iowa. And come see that show in early December at Space Place Theater. The first week of December, it features the collaborations of 10 University of Iowa graduate students from different art disciplines. Some of them are here tonight. I also have an ongoing collaboration with Moroccan choreographer Hind Ben Ali. We have had residencies in the USA, Burkina Faso, and Morocco, and our conversations revolve around cross-cultural collaboration, the female body, and our personal histories. And when we worked in Morocco, I was privileged to listen to much dialogue on the Arab Spring, Islamic fundamentalism in government, and being a female artist and performer in a completely liberating and silencing time. Our new work is titled Her Other Side and is a 60-minute performance, and the work comments on and undermines hyper-stereotypes of, quote, American and Arab female bodies. We interact with the audiences to implicate them in our questions on power, constraint, freedom, and sexuality. This transnational collaboration between 2 female artists compares cultures finding visible differences and similarities, yet finds a common ground in social constructs manipulations, and violence towards the female body. Hopefully this sound.
What you know about me? What you know about me? What you know about me? What you know about me?
So a more recent research theme for me is art and technology, and as an addicted, we've all talked about that a little bit. And as an addicted emailer and iPhone user, I'm interested in how technology is affecting the body and how the global circulation of viral videos are opening up new networks in postmodern movement sampling. And right now you're going to see a 10-minute choreography excerpt that explores this technology featuring the phenomenally talented University of Iowa dance students. And the full length of this work is 25 minutes, and it was premiered at the Dance Gala just the past few weekends. And Jason Palomera composed the music, and the title of the piece is How Does This App Work? LOL, feels like I'm misbehaving. Dancers? Okay.
Blazed, habitual, frustrated, stumped, lost and looking for information in my head. I can't think of what I wanted to say. I'm not present. Crazy. LOL. How does this work? This is
I can't stop thinking. I wish I could sleep, but my mind won't shut up. Why won't it shut off?
Fan.
My mind is so preoccupied. Frustrated, looking crazy, dancing. How does this app work? LOL. Funny and fine and funny and good and confused, glazed, stumped, misbehaving all the time.
So that was excerpts. So that's probably why it felt a little abrupt because we just basically cut it. So we don't go over the 20-minute time limit. Okay, thank you. That's all.